So I mentioned our approach. We do a lot of work in this area. These are some of the companies that we work with and have worked with in most of these cases for many, many years. And we survey ethics and compliance programs. And we look at what the regulators are looking at because they see all the problems. And we incorporate those criteria into the surveys that we do. And what interests us isn't what a program looks like in practice. If you look at Wells Fargo, if you look at NBC Universal, which had a huge sexual harassment scandal that led to the departure of many famous people, they all had codes of conduct, they all had hotlines, they all had training, they all had audit departments, but they still failed. And I think there's been much too much emphasis in the past about the structure and the elements, and not enough about, does it actually work? Are we investing in the right things? So take a look at our website if you're interested in more information and some of the reports that are up there. So I just mentioned checklists. How many people in the room have ever raised teenagers? Yeah, does that work? Not in my experience. I mean, yeah, you need the rules, but you need to motivate people to why the rules are there and what you're trying to accomplish with them. I just did a big project a year ago for the World Bank, and they made the point, which was a good one, that if you focus exclusively on rules, you're actually setting the minimum. You're saying to people, you have to do at least this. Well, that's not really a great way to encourage people to behave well. And what we see is that there are certain companies, Volkswagen is a good example, that thrive on coercion. And it's, I'm the boss, you're the subordinate, do it or else, and don't argue with me. And when the U.S. employees involved in the Volkswagen scandal raised problems to the headquarters in Germany, that the CEO, actually, I believe personally, the one that was fired, said, I don't want to hear anything more about this. And there's another company, PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, in California, which is now in bankruptcy and probably caused, it looks like, major fires throughout California. They lied to regulators. They did the same things, the 6 factors that were up there. And when employees raised questions, they suddenly found themselves without a job. So no matter what your code of conduct says, if that's what you do, that's what your culture is. So the middle is motivation. I will give you a bonus if you meet your targets. Great, okay, that's how most companies function. But if it turns out that I'll give you a bonus, but only if you meet your targets, and I don't particularly care how, and if you fail to meet your targets, there are going to be really horrific consequences, then that's your culture. It's not your code of conduct or your ideals and your values. And the third model, which we see emerging more and more, is inspiration. And that's what really shifts behavior. And that's talking about values. That's talking about doing things right, not just meeting the minimum. And that's what actually elevates behavior in the workforce. And we're seeing that with CEOs, and we're seeing that more and more, that there's a recognition that there has to be a more collaborative, values-based approach to corporate leadership, that's what's effective. And as I'll show later, it actually makes better business sense. It leads to stronger performance. So last year we came out with our second moral leadership report, and it was a worldwide survey of 1,100 and some white-collar private sector employees in the United States and abroad. And what we found is that there was a strong consensus, as I'll show in some of the charts, that effective moral leadership reduces misconduct, spurs innovation, and actually enhances business performance. In the past, people have said, well, I really want to be ethical, but it's going to cost me business. But interestingly, it's the other way around. If you are ethical, that enhances innovation. That enhances your whole concept of sustainability. And our CEO, who participates a lot in the World Economic Forum and speaks quite a bit, talks about how moral leadership is about how leaders touch hearts, not just minds, and how they enlist others in a shared and significant endeavor and create the conditions in which everyone can contribute their fullest talent and realize their deepest humanity. Those are very inspiring words to take to heart. And there are practical considerations as well. It's not just about being good. The fact is, our research shows very strongly year over year that the people surveyed in the Moral Leadership Report think that their company is exposed to risk by an overwhelming majority when the leadership fails to consider the ethical or moral implications of what they do. It also shows that with leaders who rarely or never demonstrate moral leadership behaviors, they are 10 times more likely to treat people unfairly. They are 8 times more likely to hoard information. That's the Volkswagen model. I have all the information, you don't. I don't want to hear your questions or concerns. They're 5 times more likely to prioritize short-term results over long-term mission. Another tragic example of this is Boeing, a storied U.S. company. And I never thought I'd be talking about Boeing having an ethical meltdown as it's had over the 737 MAX. But there was tremendous pressure to get the plane out on time to meet the schedules. Okay, that makes sense. But the objections and the concerns of experienced employees were overridden in that process. We all know that that resulted apparently in 2 crashes that killed a lot of people. So again, it comes down to what is your culture really? Is it really about valuing employee input and values and doing the right thing? Or is it about short-term results? We also see that the incidence of observed abuses of power goes substantially sky high with leaders who rarely or demonstrate moral leadership, and 67% more incidences of unethical manager behavior. That's important in the era of Me Too, where companies are really now taking very seriously, as Zelma's company is, the question of how do you promote a respectful workplace. If you don't have values-based behavior, all the rules in the world aren't going to change things for you. So another data point from our report is that if your manager fails to lead with moral authority, you are 42 times more likely to believe that individuals will be ignored for taking a stand, for raising an issue. Certainly the scandals that we just looked at would tend to support that as well. You are 34 times more likely to believe that individuals will be held back or fired for taking a stand. One of the big Silicon Valley scandals in the last couple of years has been made into a book and a movie. The book is called Bad Blood, and the company was Theranos. It involved the most valuable startup to date at that time in the blood testing area. And there was one big problem with their revolutionary approach to blood testing, and it's that it didn't work. They tried and tried, but it didn't work. and the cash kept pouring in. So when employees in the lab actually took a stand and said, it doesn't work, and we don't really want to kill people, we don't want to give them fake test results, they got fired. One of them, actually, the grandson of George Shultz, was prosecuted. Well, suits were brought against him by the company lawyers, and eventually his family had to pay, I think it was about $400,000 to defend him, and it turned out he was right. And it looks like the founder and her COO are probably headed for jail. The company is defunct. So it's really a failure to lead with moral authority is a very expensive thing to do. So I mentioned earlier that there's also a link to performance. And I think this is very helpful in terms of looking at how companies really should think about this area. And again, in the past it was all, well, I'll lose business. I remember when we were looking at an acquisition when I was in-house with a large multinational, we were looking at an acquisition in China, and we found out they had 3 sets of books. We said, this isn't really going to work for us. They said, well, then we can't do business. So we walked away, which is the right decision. But it's not, in fact, the case that if you embrace a values-based moral leadership approach, that you're actually giving up business. You might in the short term, in that you get your plane to market, or you don't have to invest to fix your dam, but in the end, as you can see from what happened in those instances, that can be a very expensive business model, and not one that's sustainable over the long term. So what we see when we analyze, basically, what companies are doing in this regard is that those that embrace this model achieve their business goals more readily, enable, I think I need more now, oh, sorry about that, achieve their business goals more readily, enable innovation, are trusted by colleagues, foster ethical workplace, and inspire best efforts. If people feel that you're serious about what you're doing, and that you really are, as we like to say in the States, walking the walk as well as talking the talk, they're much more inclined to actually outperform. They're much more inclined to make the right decision, even if it may, in fact, cause some difficulties for them. And another classic example is United Airlines. A couple of years ago, they took a doctor off a plane, and he went kicking and screaming and bleeding. And interestingly, what they did was consistent with the rule book. And the rule book literally does weigh 5 pounds. I've seen it. And so that, in fact, was the authorized procedure. Well, it turned out to be wrong. It turned out to be a dreadful thing to do. It turned out to really hurt their brand and to drive great damage. But what that was an example of is relying on rules to the point where you're not allowing employees or encouraging employees to do the right thing, to outperform. So it's really something to think about as